My name is Mike, and I've lived in Maplewood all my life. It's a small, close-knit town where everyone knows everyone else, and life is supposed to be simple. For the past 13 years, I've been married to Rachel. We have two beautiful kids, Ethan and Lily, and a cozy two-story house that Rachel decorated herself. Each corner of our home is filled with memories, from the photos on the mantelpiece to the old rocking chair where we've read countless bedtime stories to the kids. I work as an engineer at a local firm. I love my job, the routine of it, the problem-solving, and the satisfaction of seeing a project come together. Rachel is a part-time graphic designer. She works from home, juggling her career with the demands of raising our kids. Ethan, our 8-year-old son, is a ball of energy who loves soccer and building intricate Lego structures. Lily, our 6-year-old daughter, is always dancing around the house, singing her favorite songs. Maplewood is the kind of town where neighbors look out for each other, and community events bring everyone together. Rachel and I are well known here. We're the couple that's always at school functions, town fairs, and neighborhood barbecues. From the outside, we seem like the perfect family living the ideal suburban life. But lately, I've noticed subtle changes in Rachel's behavior. Little things that have started to gnaw at me. Changes that make me wonder if everything is really as perfect as it seems. It started innocuously enough. A subtle shift that I might have missed if I wasn't paying attention. Rachel began staying up late, claiming she had more work to do. At first, I believed her. After all, her job as a graphic designer often demanded odd hours. But then, there were the unexplained absences during the day, the sudden meetings with clients she never mentioned before, and the increased time she spent on her phone, always quick to lock the screen when I walked into the room. One evening, while she was out on one of her supposed client meetings, I decided to clean up the kitchen. As I was sorting through the pile of receipts and junk mail on the counter, something caught my eye. It was a crumpled receipt from a place called the Velvet Lounge. Curiosity piqued, I smoothed it out and read the details. It was from a strip club in the next town over, dated just a few nights ago. My heart started to pound. Why would Rachel have a receipt from a strip club? She had never mentioned going to such a place, and it didn't fit with the image of the devoted wife and mother she portrayed. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a prank, or perhaps she went there out of curiosity with some girlfriends. But deep down, I knew something was off. That night, when she came home, I tried to act normal, though my mind was racing. She seemed unusually cheerful, almost as if nothing was wrong. We had dinner with the kids, did our usual bedtime routine, and then settled into the living room. She picked up her laptop, ostensibly to work, while I sat there, staring at the television, but not really watching. "How was your meeting?" I asked casually, trying to keep my voice steady. "It was fine," she replied without looking up. "Just a lot of last-minute changes. You know how clients can be." I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, I get it. They can be demanding." But my mind was far from at ease. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I started to pay more attention to her actions, noticing things I had previously overlooked. The hushed phone calls, the way she would disappear into the bedroom for hours with the door closed, and the way she seemed to be dressing up more than usual, even for simple errands. One afternoon, while she was out again, I decided to dig a little deeper. I went through her desk, feeling a pang of guilt for invading her privacy but needing to know the truth. I found more receipts, this time from expensive restaurants and bars in the city, places we had never been to together. My stomach churned as the evidence piled up, each piece a brick in the wall of suspicion building inside me. The final straw came when I found a hidden folder on our shared laptop, filled with photos of Rachel with a man I didn't recognize. They were at some of those same restaurants, looking far too cozy to be just friends. My hands shook as I closed the laptop, my mind reeling with the implications. I couldn't confront her yet. I needed more proof, and I needed to figure out how to approach this without completely losing my mind. I felt a mix of anger, hurt, and betrayal. The life I thought I knew was slipping through my fingers, and I had to get to the bottom of it before it was too late. The days that followed were a blur of anxiety and sleepless nights. I couldn't shake the image of those photos from my mind, and every time Rachel left the house, my suspicions grew. I needed concrete evidence, something undeniable. My gut told me I wasn't overreacting, but I couldn't act on a hunch alone. One evening, I decided to follow her. She said she had another client meeting, But this time I wasn't going to take her word for it. As she left, I grabbed my coat and keys and discreetly trailed her car through the winding roads of Maplewood and into the neighboring town. She parked in front of a nondescript building with a neon sign that read, "The Velvet Lounge." My heart sank. She had lied again. I watched from a distance as she entered the club, greeted warmly by a man who seemed all too familiar from the photos. He had a confident swagger and wrapped his arm around her waist as they disappeared inside. I waited for a few minutes, then decided to follow. I walked into the dimly lit club, the pulsing music and flashing lights almost overwhelming. I spotted Rachel and the man heading toward a back room, laughing and leaning into each other. They didn't notice me, too wrapped up in their own world. Keeping a safe distance, I watched as they entered a private room. My blood boiled. I approached the bouncer guarding the area, slipping him a few bills to let me through. He eyed me suspiciously, but stepped aside, money speaking louder than any words I could offer. I stood outside the door, heart pounding, listening to the muffled sounds of their conversation. It quickly turned to hushed giggles and unmistakable sounds of intimacy. The room spun, anger and betrayal crashing over me in waves. I pushed open the door, needing to see for myself despite the agony it would bring. There they were, tangled together in the dim light, lost in their passion. Rachel looked up, eyes wide with shock and horror as she saw me standing there. The man scrambled to cover himself, cursing under his breath. "Mike, what are you doing here?" Rachel stammered, her face flushed with both exertion and guilt. "What am I doing here?" I echoed, my voice trembling with rage. "What the hell are you doing here, Rachel? With him?" She tried to pull herself together, wrapping a sheet around her. "It's not what it looks like," she began, but I cut her off, not wanting to hear any more lies. "Save it, Rachel," I snapped. "I've seen enough." The man, finally managing to get his pants on, tried to step in. "Look, man, this is between you and her. I didn't know she was married." "Stay out of this," I growled, my eyes never leaving Rachel's. "We're going home, now." Rachel didn't argue. She gathered her things, avoiding my gaze, and followed me out. The drive home was silent, tension thick in the air. My mind raced, struggling to process the betrayal and what it meant for our future. Back at the house, I turned to her as soon as we were inside. "How long, Rachel? How long has this been going on?" She hesitated, tears welling up in her eyes. "A few months," she admitted quietly. "But it didn't mean anything, Mike. I was lonely, and he was just there." "Didn't mean anything?" I repeated, incredulous. "You destroyed our family for something that didn't mean anything. Do you have any idea what you've done?" She broke down then, sobbing uncontrollably. "I'm sorry, Mike. I never wanted to hurt you or the kids. I don't know what I was thinking." Her words felt hollow, the damage already done. I turned away, unable to look at her any longer. "I need some time to think," I said quietly. "Well, talk about this tomorrow." I walked upstairs to the guest room, my mind a whirlwind of anger, sorrow, and confusion. As I lay there in the darkness, one thing became painfully clear. Our lives would never be the same again. The next morning, I woke up with a heavy heart, the events of the previous night playing over and over in my mind like a broken record. I had no appetite for breakfast, so I sat in the kitchen nursing a cup of coffee, waiting for Rachel to wake up. The house was eerily quiet, the usual morning chaos absent. When Rachel finally appeared, she looked as disheveled as I felt. Her eyes were red and puffy from crying, her shoulders slumped with the weight of her actions. She opened her mouth to say something, but I cut her off. "Save it, Rachel. We need to talk about this, and I need you to be honest with me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She nodded, sitting down at the table across from me. "I understand, Mike. I'll tell you everything." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Why? Why did you do it?" Rachel looked down at her hands, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was lonely, Mike. You were always working, always busy. I felt like I was invisible to you. Chris was. He was there. He paid attention to me, made me feel wanted." "Lonely?" I echoed, struggling to keep my anger in check. "Do you think I wasn't lonely too? Do you think I didn't miss you when I was working late to provide for our family?" She wiped away a tear. "I know, Mike. I know. But it wasn't just the loneliness. I felt disconnected from you, like we were living separate lives under the same roof." Her words stung, but I couldn't let her off the hook that easily. So you thought the solution was to sleep with someone else? To lie to me and betray our family? I never meant for it to go this far, she said, her voice cracking. It started as just talking. Then it escalated. I didn't know how to stop it. I shook my head, feeling a mix of anger and sorrow. You could have talked to me, Rachel. You could have told me how you were feeling instead of running to someone else. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I know, and I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. I stared at her, the woman I had loved for so many years, now a stranger. Sorry isn't going to fix this, I said quietly. What you did. It's not something I can just forgive and forget. I'll do anything to make it right, Mike, she pleaded. I'll go to counseling. I'll cut off all contact with Chris. Just please give me a chance to make things right. I sighed, rubbing my temples. Counseling might help, but it's not going to erase what you've done. I need time to figure out what I want, what we need. Rachel nodded, her face a mask of desperation. I'll do whatever it takes, Mike, I promise. I stood up, needing to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the kitchen. I need some air. I'll be back later. I left the house, walking aimlessly through the neighborhood. The fresh air did little to clear my mind, the weight of Rachel's betrayal pressing down on me. I found myself at the park, where I used to take Ethan and Lily when they were younger. I sat on a bench, watching the children play, and wondered how I was going to explain this to them. How do you tell your kids that their mother has shattered their family? As the sun began to set, I knew I had to go back and face Rachel again. We couldn't avoid this forever. When I returned home, Rachel was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the TV. She looked up as I entered, her eyes filled with hope and fear. Did you think about what I said? She asked tentatively. I did, I replied, sitting down across from her. I think we need to separate for a while. I need space to process this, and you need to figure out what you really want. Rachel's face crumpled, but she nodded. If that's what you need, I understand. It's not forever, I added, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. But right now, I can't be around you. I need time to heal. She nodded again, tears streaming down her face. I'll stay with my sister for a while, give you the space you need. As she packed a bag and left the house, I felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. Our confrontation had been painful, but necessary. Now I had to focus on picking up the pieces of my shattered life and figuring out what came next. Rachel left for her sister's that night, leaving me alone in our now eerily quiet house. I spent the next few days in a daze, trying to make sense of everything. The betrayal gnawed at me constantly, and I couldn't shake the image of Rachel and Chris together. The anger simmered just below the surface, threatening to boil over at any moment. I needed an outlet for all this pent-up rage, and slowly, a plan began to form in my mind. Revenge. It was a word that kept echoing in my head. I knew it wasn't the most mature response, but I couldn't help myself. I needed to make them both pay for what they had done. It wasn't just about Rachel, it was about Chris, too. He had knowingly participated in destroying my family, and he deserved to face the consequences. First, I gathered every bit of evidence I had, the receipts, the photos, the messages. I made copies of everything, ensuring I had undeniable proof of their affair. Then, I set up a meeting with a private investigator. I needed more information about Chris, and I knew a PI could dig up the dirt I needed. A week later, I had everything I needed. The PI had provided me with a detailed report on Chris, his workplace, his routines, and even his home address. I felt a grim satisfaction as I reviewed the files. Now it was time to put my plan into action. I started with Rachel. I wanted her to feel the same humiliation and betrayal that I did. I made sure to visit our mutual friends and subtly let slip what had happened. I didn't need to say much. Just a few well-placed comments were enough to get the gossip mill turning. Soon everyone knew about her infidelity. Her phone blew up with calls and texts from friends and family, expressing their shock and disappointment. Next, I turned my attention to Chris. Using the information the PI had gathered, I orchestrated a series of events designed to ruin his life. I anonymously sent copies of the photos and messages to his employer, along with a detailed account of his affair with a married woman. I knew his company had strict policies about personal conduct, and it didn't take long for the hammer to fall. Chris was fired within a week, his reputation in shambles. But I wasn't done yet. I wanted him to feel the sting of public humiliation. I created a fake social media account and posted the evidence of his affair, tagging him and his family members. The post quickly went viral, spreading like wildfire through our community. Chris's friends and family were appalled, and he found himself ostracized and alone. Rachel, too, faced the fallout. Our friends turned their backs on her, and even her own sister struggled to support her after learning the full extent of her betrayal. She called me, begging for forgiveness, but I couldn't bring myself to speak to her. I wasn't ready to forgive, and I wasn't sure I ever would be. Despite the satisfaction of my revenge, I couldn't escape the sense of emptiness that followed. My marriage was over, my family torn apart. I knew I had to face the reality of my situation and start rebuilding my life, but it was a daunting prospect. I had spent so long defining myself by my relationship with Rachel that I wasn't sure who I was without her. One evening, as I sat alone in the house, surrounded by the remnants of our life together, I realized that I needed help. I couldn't do this on my own. I reached out to a therapist, hoping that talking to someone might help me process everything that had happened. Therapy was hard, but necessary. I had to confront my anger, my hurt, and my sense of betrayal. Slowly, I began to understand that my revenge, while satisfying in the moment, had done little to heal the deep wounds Rachel's affair had inflicted. I needed to let go of the past and focus on my future. In time, I found a sense of peace. I knew that healing would be a long journey, but I was ready to take the first steps. And as I looked at my children, I realized that they were my reason for moving forward. They deserved a father who was whole, not consumed by anger and revenge. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was determined to rebuild my life. One day at a time, I would find my way back to happiness. And though Rachel's betrayal had changed me forever, it wouldn't define the rest of my life. After weeks of silence, Rachel called me, asking if we could talk. She said she needed closure, but I suspected she was looking for another chance to plead her case. Despite my initial hesitation, I agreed to meet her. I knew this conversation was inevitable, and I wanted to face it head-on, if only to bring some finality to our shattered relationship. We met at a quiet cafe on the edge of town. It was a place we used to frequent when we were younger, back when things were simpler. Rachel arrived first and was sitting at a corner table, nervously stirring a cup of tea. I took a deep breath and walked over, feeling a mix of apprehension and resolve. "Mike," she said softly as I sat down, her eyes filled with a combination of hope and sorrow. "Rachel," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. There was a heavy silence between us before she finally spoke. "I'm so sorry for everything. I know I've hurt you in ways I can't even begin to apologize for. But I need you to understand. I never stopped loving you." Her words felt like a dagger, twisting the knife of betrayal deeper into my heart. "You have a funny way of showing it," I said bitterly. "You think sleeping with another man is a sign of love?" Tears welled up in her eyes. "No, I know it was wrong. I was lost, Mike. I felt so alone, so disconnected. Chris was. He was a mistake, a terrible mistake. A mistake that lasted months," I retorted. "A mistake that you lied about over and over. How can you expect me to believe anything you say now?" She looked down, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "I don't expect you to believe me. I don't even know if I deserve your forgiveness. But I need you to know how deeply I regret everything." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Regret doesn't change what happened, Rachel. It doesn't fix the damage you've done. You shattered our family, our trust." "I know," she whispered. "But I'm willing to do anything to make it right. Counseling, therapy, whatever it takes, just, please, give me a chance to prove that I can change." I looked at her, seeing the desperation in her eyes. A part of me wanted to believe her, to give her the chance she was asking for, but the wounds were too fresh, too deep. "I can't," I said finally. "I can't just forget what you did, and I don't know if I can ever trust you again." She nodded slowly, her expression resigned. "I understand. I want you to know that I'm going to keep trying, for myself and for the kids. I owe them that much." The kids, I echoed, my voice softening. They're the ones who are going to suffer the most from this. We need to put them first, Rachel. We need to be civil for their sake. Of course, she agreed quickly. They're the most important thing. We can work out a co-parenting arrangement, something that keeps their lives as stable as possible. We spent the next hour discussing the logistics of our separation, focusing on how to minimize the impact on Ethan and Lily. It was a difficult conversation, but a necessary one. By the end, we had a rough plan in place, one that prioritized our children's well-being above all else. As we stood to leave, Rachel reached out and touched my arm. Thank you, Mike, for meeting with me, for being willing to talk. I nodded, pulling away gently. Goodbye, Rachel. Goodbye, Mike, she replied, her voice barely a whisper. I watched her walk away, a sense of finality settling over me. Our last conversation had been painful, but it also brought a strange sense of closure. I knew that moving forward wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary. I had to focus on healing and building a new life for myself and my children. As I left the cafe, I felt a mixture of sadness and relief. The chapter with Rachel was closing, and while it had ended in betrayal and heartbreak, it was time to look to the future. I was ready to start the next chapter, one step at a time. The weeks leading up to the trial were a whirlwind of preparation and emotional strain. My lawyer, Marcia, was relentless in gathering every piece of evidence we needed to secure a fair outcome. The nights were long, and the days were filled with a mix of dread and determination. I knew this trial wasn't just about the divorce. It was about ensuring that Ethan and Lily would have a stable and loving environment to grow up in. The day of the trial arrived, and I walked into the courthouse with a mixture of apprehension and resolve. Rachel was already there, sitting with her lawyer. She looked anxious, her usual confidence replaced by a vulnerability I hadn't seen in a long time. I took a deep breath and focused on what needed to be done. The proceedings began with the judge addressing both parties, emphasizing the importance of maintaining decorum for the sake of our children. Marcia presented our case methodically, outlining Rachel's infidelity and the impact it had on our family. She presented the evidence, the photos, the messages, the receipts, each piece a painful reminder of Rachel's betrayal. Rachel's lawyer tried to paint a different picture, emphasizing her role as a loving mother and downplaying the affair as a momentary lapse in judgment. But the evidence was irrefutable, and Rachel herself admitted to the affair when questioned. Her tears and apologies, while heartfelt, couldn't erase the damage done. When it was my turn to speak, I took a deep breath and addressed the judge. Your Honor, my primary concern is the well-being of our children. Ethan and Lily deserve a stable, loving environment. Rachel's actions have caused a rift in our family that will take time to heal. I'm not here to punish her, but to ensure that our children have the support and stability they need. Rachel was given the opportunity to speak next. She stood up, her voice trembling. I know I made a terrible mistake. I regret it every day. But I love my children more than anything, and I want to be a part of their lives. I'm committed to making things right and to being the best mother I can be. The judge listened carefully, weighing the evidence and our testimonies. After what felt like an eternity, he finally spoke. Divorce is never easy, especially when children are involved. It's clear that both parents love their children and want what's best for them. Given the circumstances, I am awarding joint custody, with primary physical custody to Mr. Thompson. Mrs. Thompson will have visitation rights, and I strongly recommend that both parties seek counseling to help navigate this difficult transition. Relief washed over me. It wasn't a perfect outcome, but it was a fair one. I knew that having primary custody would provide Ethan and Lily with the stability they needed. Rachel looked relieved as well, perhaps understanding that this was the best compromise for our children. After the trial, Rachel approached me in the hallway. Thank you, Mike, she said softly, for being fair. I know I don't deserve it, but I appreciate it. I nodded, feeling a mixture of emotions. This is about the kids, Rachel. We need to put them first. She nodded, wiping away a tear. I will. I promise. As we parted ways, I felt a sense of closure. The trial had been exhausting, but it marked the beginning of a new chapter. I was determined to focus on my children and rebuild our lives. The road ahead would be challenging, but I was ready to face it, one step at a time. The first few weeks after the trial were a blur of adjustments and new routines. Ethan and Lily were understandably confused and upset by the changes, but I did my best to provide them with a sense of stability and security. We spent a lot of time together, just the three of us, rediscovering our bond and creating new memories. I moved into a new apartment, a fresh start that symbolized the beginning of our new life. It was smaller than our old house, but cozy and filled with warmth. The kids helped me decorate their rooms, choosing bright colors and posters of their favorite superheroes and movie characters. We planted a small garden on the balcony, something for us to nurture and grow together. Rachel and I maintained a civil relationship for the sake of the children. She visited them regularly, and we made sure to present a united front when it came to parenting. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Counseling sessions helped us communicate more effectively and work through the residual bitterness and hurt. As the months passed, I found myself slowly healing. The anger and betrayal that had consumed me began to fade, replaced by a sense of resilience and newfound strength. I started to focus on my own well-being, taking up hobbies I had long neglected. I joined a local running club, something I had enjoyed in my younger days, and found solace in the rhythm of my footsteps pounding against the pavement. The kids were thriving too. Ethan joined a soccer team, his passion for the sport reignited. I attended every game, cheering him on from the sidelines. Lily took up dance classes, her natural grace and enthusiasm shining through in every performance. Seeing them happy and engaged in activities they loved filled me with a sense of pride and hope. Work provided another anchor. I threw myself into my projects, finding satisfaction in the challenges and the accomplishments. My colleagues noticed the change in me, commenting on how I seemed more focused and driven. It was as if a weight had been lifted, and I was finally able to see clearly again. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, I sat on the balcony, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. The quiet moments had become a time for reflection, a chance to appreciate how far we had come. I thought about the past year, the heartbreak and the struggle, but also the growth and the new beginnings. I had learned a lot about myself through this ordeal. I had discovered a strength I didn't know I possessed, and a capacity for forgiveness that I never thought possible. Forgiveness not just for Rachel but for myself. I had made mistakes too, neglected the emotional needs of my family while trying to provide for them, but I had also learned that it was okay to be imperfect, to stumble and fall, as long as I kept moving forward. I wasn't the same man I had been before Rachel's betrayal, but in many ways, I was better, wiser, more empathetic, and more aware of what truly mattered in life. I knew there would still be challenges ahead, but I was ready to face them with an open heart and a clear mind. The door to my past had closed, but a new one had opened, leading to a future filled with possibilities. I didn't know what that future held, but I was excited to find out. For now, I was content to take it one day at a time, cherishing the moments with my children and the peace I had found within myself. Life had thrown me a curveball, but I had hit it head on. I was ready to embrace whatever came next, confident in the knowledge that I had the strength to overcome any obstacle. The future was mine to shape, and I was determined to make it a bright one for myself and my children.